But when I was an undergrad, there was a big tuition hike that was about to happen. So like I said, we were calling our governors to task, and I realized it's not just enough to call them to task, but you have to have a plan, you have to be strategic, and you have to be focused. And when I talk about the intersection of policy and politics is the bigger network. If it was just me alone saying what I needed to get done while I was an undergrad about lowering tuition or just at least bringing attention to the cost, it wouldn't have mattered. I had to create a coalition of students. We had students from Bloomfield, Montclair, Rutgers undergrad, all the way up to New York talking about how tuition was being increased. And so it was this broader network that I created that was really able to impact what was happening at my school at the time, which is Rutgers University North. That first entree into this space where I had adults, I had leadership listening to me, made me realize it's not just enough to be able to talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk and understand how and what you're doing and why it matters. We had them in the room, but we did back everything we had with facts. And that kind of transitioned into every other space of work I've done. So when I got out of undergrad, I went right into private sector. I was like, I'm gonna make a lot of money, this is gonna be amazing. But again, remember I said when you go into these spaces, it's what's your passion, what drives you. And so while I was making great money, I realized this is great, but I don't necessarily like this corporation I'm working for. And so I started looking at some of the policies that were undergirding this big institution that I was working for. I realized my heart doesn't feel set on this. And so the more I started researching, the more I realized I was gonna have to leave, no matter what. Even if they were a big company, if I was making a ton of money, it wasn't what my heart was drawn to. And I also know that I have to always be really like, you know that you don't know our parents tell us you gotta do what feels right. I knew for me I had to do what felt right. So I left this job, making a lot of money, and then went into politics. And the first job I got was working for Senator Frankel. Senator Frankel is one of the most esteemed, established senators that ever walked this earth. And I think for me, one of the reasons I wanted to work for him is that he was the first senator that banned smoking on planes. Y'all are too young to know this, but you know they could smoke on planes before? Like, could you imagine being in the air, you're trying to get your sleep on, relax, and somebody's smoking a cigarette next to you? Right. It's terrible, right? So by working for this senator, and I wasn't there the time he did this, but one of the first things he did was ban smoking on planes. One of the other big initiatives that he did was stop police profiling in New Jersey. There was a time in New Jersey, if you were driving while black, you just knew you were going to get pulled over. And it wasn't just based on the fact of what car you drove, they were basing it on your race. And so the senator put federal legislation in banning this, right? So there are things that he did legislatively, which to me were reasons I wanted to work for him. Another one of the things I did while I was there, do you guys know about the Tuskegee Airmen? Y'all didn't see the movie?
Why? I think I heard that before.
About the black aviation fighter pilots? Right. So
we'll deal with that in another.
That's a different section, but they were some of the first pilots, African American, to be given red wings, which is a very big deal. And a lot of the other pilots at that time, because it was still segregated, is that my phone going on? Of course it is. A lot of the pilots at that time, after the war was over, they all got congressional gold medals. The Tuskegee Airmen, despite everything that they had done, didn't get any recognition. I mean, they saved lives, they were phenomenal. So one of the things I did with Senator Lautenberg was make sure that these men of color got congressional gold medals, which to me was a big thing because there were so few of them. So that's Senator Lautenberg. Transitioning from him, I realized I wanted to get back and get closer into the work on the ground. Doing things on a federal level is exciting and it's different. But for me, everything is always done on the ground. Any of you guys live in Orange or from Orange, or where are you guys from? Are you from Ohio? Where are you from?
South Jersey.
South Jersey? I do a little bit with Willingboro.
Yeah.
Okay. Where are you from?
Maryland.
Maryland. Okay. Where are you from?
Patterson.
Patterson. We did a lot in Patterson. There's a lot going on politically in Patterson too, huh?
Doing a lot of political, but not the ain't fixing these roads.
But see, can I say, but part of that is through policy, right? So as an active constituent, part of your role in this is to actively become engaged. So you're writing your council people, you're writing your mayor about potholes, because we got potholes nonstop in the city. But again, you have to let people know about these issues and so they can actually make a difference. So going back through all this, I worked for a mayor in Orange. At this time, I was the youngest chief of staff in the city of Orange. And prior to me being there, the guy that was there, his profession before getting there was a bus driver. So I get there, I'm like, I work for United States Senator, I've drafted all these policies, I'm really excited about this work, it's a black community, I'm gonna do so well. And one of the first things I started hearing was A, that I wasn't qualified, despite the fact that the man that was there before me was a bus driver. B, I was seen as an interloper because I wasn't from the municipality. And C, was that the only reason I was there was because clearly I was just there to warm somebody's bed. So these are the things, being a woman of color, that I had to confront in a city of color, right? Could you even imagine what that could or would be like if you were there?
That made me look at people real differently, and it's
Yeah.
not because I feel like it should be something like where you help your people out,
Yeah.
and not only because like we're the same color, but like even helping people of minority. Like we all been through something, and I feel like that should have been something where y'all should have just came together and made it work. Like having somebody look at you or
Yeah.
saying that you're not qualified for something when you have all the qualifications
Yeah.
for it, that's something different.
What would you respond to, or how would you make things different? How would you turn that situation? I'll tell you what I did, but how would you enter into that situation, having worked for politics on a federal level, having a desire to come back and work for a community that meant a lot to you, but realizing that your reception was so different than what you anticipated? What would you feel like? What would you do? What would you try to change? Start a nonprofit?
Start a
Just
nonprofit
go in
and
another
do
direction.
and do my own thing on the side. They'll look at me and be like, oh, didn't she try to come for this job? And I'm sitting here doing something better than what you did or what you could have done.
A lot of times though, you don't have to really like say or do anything, you show them.
Mhm.
So you
Talk about
can, put it in your work.
Talk about it.
And I think one thing is like being a person of color. I think that I look at other nationalities and they help each other,
Yeah.
And I think we're the only people who tear each other down instead of helping one another and seeing, other families, like I look at other families and they live together until they can go off and
Yeah.
have their money to do their own. We're the only ones. We're gonna be like, you gotta do all of this. It's like we take from each other instead of putting into each other and make us stronger.
What would you do, Mr. Marilyn?
I mean, I agree with you.
I know that either. Never going
Right?
to this house.
But what they were saying, I'll probably just show my talents in my work.
Yeah.
So people know what I'm capable of and not put me down as much.
Yeah.
So what'd you do?
So after I dusted myself off and made sure that my parents did not come in there kicking and screaming and trying to drag people out of council meetings, because my parents are very protective of me, I realized I had to like dig my feet in deeply and honestly use the resources that I had, use the federal connections that I had, and really change the narrative about what they thought about me. Even if you don't like me, that's fine, but what I will show you is that by having me in this room, you will have so much more access than this city ever had. So one of the first things I did was create a mentoring program. They never had that. So you get the parents on your side, start connecting them to other education activities, opportunities within other universities. So connecting them to Bloomfield College, to Montclair State, to Rutgers. So they're seeing there's opportunities for their kids. The second thing I did was show them that this city has so much opportunity. I connected them to federal grants. So at this time, Senator Lautenberg was still in office and he was over the Appropriations Committee. Appropriations is a very big deal because this is where all the federal funding can come through to help each one of our municipalities. And so Orange, New Jersey, for the first time, actually got federal appropriations. They had never applied for it, didn't know what it was, didn't know why it was important. And the money I got for them went to help their Chestnut Street pumping station. This was the water infrastructure in their city would not allow them to build past a certain level of housing units just because they didn't have the water capacity to handle it. By getting them funding on the federal government, I was able to expand their opportunities so now they can actually build. So if you go to Orange right now, you see these buildings going up, or you see them investing in things like Hat City, which is really good. And when I left the city, the turnaround was so different. Because it wasn't based on how I talked, the fact I wasn't there, but the fact that I brought actual resources to that city that they didn't have before. And I think that's something that you guys, even while you're here, when you go into looking for your next opportunities, is despite whatever challenges, look at what resources, what opportunities you can bring to the table, because just by the nature of you being in that room, they benefit from your experiences, from your education, from your passions, from your goals. Whatever room you walk into, they're going to benefit because of having you there. Y'all know that, right?
I want to dive into that for a second though, because I think it's a really important point. A lot of what we're trying to do with this seminar is to really just sort of show pathways of where careers might be. And I think there was a really interesting question and dialogue as it relates to the potholes that I kind of, and to what you just said, that I think is really important. And I thought from your perspective, both at the municipality level and also at the state level, can you provide just a general sense, not so much as how government works, but the expertise, if you can narrow down those expertise in maybe a small handful of like, this is legislation, this is policy, this is communications, this is whatever, constituent services, whatever it might be. Because I think the great thing about this, and we kind of got into this with Jonathan last week or the week before, is that these are all jobs, right? These are all careers, these are all expertise that, so it's not really just about letting a pothole, you know,
Yeah.
or a specific issue inspire you, but just to know that within government, here are the facets of jobs that are out there. Can you kind of walk
Right,
them through
right.
like what you've experienced in that
So,
capacity?
in municipal government, I had no idea how many opportunities or services were actually available just coming from federal to work for municipal. They have animal control where they can catch a dog, bring it back, to things such as engineers who their job is to work on figuring out a way to make sure that there's not as much traffic or congestion in the streets. That is their full-time job. There are people that all they do and all they focus on is traffic circulation patterns. So if you're going through your city, like realize there's a lot of congestion, there are people whose sole job it is to understand why the ebb and flow of traffic happens the way it is. So the days that you sometimes see cops out on the street directing traffic because a light is out. So there's a whole system behind how and why that happens, right? And so I think that's kind of a really cool thing. And then even down to paving the holes in the not the sidewalk, but in the street as we have these snowstorms that come and, you know, it erode, all the salt erodes, all of the concrete that's on the ground. There's a whole process you have to go out to with actually bidding out. So there are people that bid on these opportunities to fill potholes in our street, but it still has to go through council, which is the legislative arm, get approved, then they can actually do the contract to fill the potholes, or they'll have an emergency contract if it's a really serious issue. But there are so many levels and layers through how this goes. So as you know, there's the administrative body. Go ahead.
But if somebody wants to fill the potholes, we have several millions of potholes. If somebody wants to let them fill the potholes, people
But
tired.
there's a liability issue. So imagine if there was a person that didn't understand the mechanics behind it. It just seems like I'm filling a pothole, but there's a specific type of concrete that you have to use, that you may have to ship out for. So that becomes now an issue where you have to go through a procurement office, and it's not just a man saying, oh, there's a pothole, I gotta fill it. But there's a certain grain that you have to actually use to infill these potholes. And then once you infill them, then you have to put concrete and another layer on top of them. So if somebody were to do that wasn't qualified, that didn't have the specifications for it, and somebody bust their heel in the pothole, guess what? The city would now be liable. So now we have to get another arm of government, not another arm, but now we have to get our law department involved so that we can protect ourselves.
So if that's a liability issue, then what about those, like, when we drive in, is a liability issue when our
I agree with you
tires
100%. But that's when you can also call the directors from these respective departments to say, hey, A, B, C, and D, after you guys have gotten your contract, there's a ton of potholes lining my street. What are you guys doing about it? And part of the benefit of being a constituent is that you can make as many complaints, give as many concerns as you want to, right? And so have any of you ever been to a council meeting?
I think I've been to one.
Do you know the importance of going to these council meetings?
I've never seen like
Hear about it.
So in Bloomfield, I would urge you to go to a council meeting. How your cities are governed, how their money is spent, is all done through the legislative arm. So it's council voting on and approving contracts for different vendors, voting on legislation on a statewide level that trickles down to the city level. Like, everything happens through that legislative arm on how your city is governed, right? So if you've got concerns about potholes, do you know who to call in Bloomfield? You better check it out. So
I don't
each,
even know who the, I've been here at this school for 4 years. I don't even know who the mayor is.
do you know who the mayor of your town is?
I don't know that.
So can I ask you guys this though? Even though it's a local level, as you guys are watching things on a national level, who is the president?
Like, which is my mom?
But who is it?
Obama.
Right.
Mine will always be
Obama.
Obama.
Right.
But who is the president?
Donald Trump.
Michelle.
She was always mine.
I think we're gonna skip that question.
2020.
So the reason I'm bringing this up is that your local officials on this level are as important on a national level as Trump. So the decisions he's making that are destroying, that are changing, that are altering the course of our country on a micro level, on a very small level. What happens in Bloomfield is the mayor has that same administrative authority.
So I want to touch on that as well, because and get kind of specific in terms of use so these guys can get a better understanding. So I think what I'm hearing and what I obviously know as well are really two interesting points that you're making. One, on a personal level, I think providing the background that you've provided, providing an understanding to all of us in terms of the importance, or at least taking the a very difficult word of policy and kind of shrinking it into a way that we can all understand it. I think that is a very helpful tool for all of us. What I'm curious about as I'm listening to you though is, a lot of what this seminar is about also is about discovering what our passions are. Obviously, it's clear what your passions are, and I think that sometimes we struggle at a younger age in trying to figuring out what those passions are. So to that point, I have really two questions. One is, when do you first in your life recognize that you had this passion for creating change, for building policy? That's number one. And what helped kind of drive that passion? And then number two, because you brought it up, I'm just kind of curious, like, you could be, and we've talked about this personally as well, I mean, you could easily, not in this current administration, but you could be easily down in Washington working, for a president in a policy advisor kind of role. What is it about, not just the passion that you discovered at a young age and how you discovered it, but why have you stayed so closely associated with the municipal level and the state level, rather than go off to DC and become a rock star?
Because that's what I love. I mean, at the end of the beginning of the day, we can laugh at all these things about, Trump, but the reality of how he impacts us on a local level is real. And I think for me, recognizing at an early age, if you don't use your voice to make a change, whether it's behind the scenes doing policy or out in the front supporting a candidate that's running, then you'll lose your voice entirely. And so for me, that's something that I take very seriously. It's something that's critically important to me. And as I watch you guys in college, I get so inspired, right? Because you're at this stage where you're discovering your passions, discovering the things that move you. For me, it was this waking, I can't sleep at night because there's so much that has to be done in my community to make it better. And once I realized on a municipal level I can do A, B, C, and D, okay, what's the next level, right? So I've done stuff on a federal level, but there's so much more that I can do to impact communities of color across the state if I'm operating at a state level. So for me, the drive constantly has always been my community. Yeah, and I mean, for me, I'm lucky because there's been opportunities that, I was able to capitalize on by my experience, by people that just had connections. And one of the things I won't underscore for you guys, whether it's your professors, whether it's your, your mom, your aunt, capitalize on these relationships you guys have while you are here. Take internships. Like kind of how I fell into politics was by mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was by chance of working on a campaign. But that opportunity opened up so many other doors and found a passion for me. A, working on campaigns, being able to change a narrative, but B, finding something that I would fight for, because it's not about you. And I think that's what I realized earlier. It's not like this fight that I'm in right now, being one of the only women of color, even in the space I'm in now, it's not about me. It's the fact that I want to see other young people of color being able to elevate themselves in these different spaces. And I think for you guys right now, you're allowed to be selfish. You're allowed to discover everything you want, try every opportunity. But they'll get a point in life when you realize that it's so much bigger than you. And that everything you do while you're in these classes, your decisions for work, are going to impact a generation after you in such a profound way. So I think, yeah.
Well, but I want to pull that. I want to go another layer down though, because I think at the core of anything that we decide to do professionally, whether it be those in the audience or yourself, there are influencers and there are people who have helped. You didn't wake up and say, I'm going to get on this campaign or I want to do this. I mean, to give everyone a sense, give me a sense of who were the people that inspired and kind of helped shape and mold the passion that you have today? How did those people have an effect on you?
So my dad grew up in Newark, didn't have anything. He was the first one in his family to go to college. And so for me, there wasn't a choice to do anything but to be successful in this space. And he was like, do not go into politics. Whatever you do, run from it, don't do it. But my dad was always such a major force in my life because I saw how impactful he was. And he grew up in a really difficult neighborhood and wanted to make sure that he always came back, supported his community. And so even though he told me not to follow his footsteps, I clearly did. But outside of my dad, what I also realized is that I have to have a support group of women around me because for me, especially in spaces where you can so often be the only one, the support system you create, which is sister girlfriends, we call it sister care, is critically important. So for me, a big influence is Micheline Davis. Micheline, I need y'all to Google her name after this class is over. I'm so serious. Micheline Davis. Micheline Davis was the first and only black woman to serve as treasurer for the state of New Jersey. I think she was 36 or 37 when she did that. She right now is the first and only Black woman to serve as an executive vice president to RWJ Barnabas healthcare system. That's one of the biggest healthcare systems in the nation. But it's the fact that she was a woman of color and saw something in so many other young Black girls that she wanted to, basically pour out and pour into. So people like Micheline and others.
And so to continue that kind of trajectory, how did you get to know Micheline?
So I'm not a shy person. I wanted to know who she was because I heard about her, I read her bio, so I went to an event that she was going to and I introduced myself. But we also had mutual friends, and I think for you guys, like, do you know what your specific passion is or what you may be interested in?
Well, I know I want to work for myself. That's what I want to
Alright.
do. Like,
So you want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So are there entrepreneurs that you've seen out there like, yo, you are killing it, you're the person that I have to follow?
Mm-hmm. And I talk to them, I'm not scared.
Okay, very good. So what made you not afraid to go up to them?
Well, I have an aunt that inspires me.
That's awesome.
And as a kid, she will always take us places. Like, she'll take us to go, like, do, like, the green eggs and ham readings and, just anywhere. And she'll always say, you see that person over there, go talk to them, tell
I
them
know
your
that's
name.
right.
And now it's just like, it's kind of normal.
And just walk us through.
I love that. I love that.
Walk us through that a little bit, like, listening to your aunt or going to talk to somebody that you might feel squeamish about. I mean, what's going on in your brain at that age when you see Micheline up at some speakers forum and you have some mutual friends, you know that you could be a mentor. The DNA or the muscle of being that kind of person. Not everyone is like that, right? I mean, I know, obviously, I'm like that, you're like that. But, for those of us who might feel timid, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, and I hope you can sort of give some context and an example, is you got to create luck for yourself. So with that in mind, talk a little bit about whether, you don't have to necessarily use Micheline as an example, but just in terms of building that muscle where you're being proactive, where you're building relationships. How does someone do that who might not necessarily have it intrinsically inside them to do it?
So I know I'm very driven, I'm very outcome driven, so I know there's an end result that I always want to have at the end of the day. And so for me, it's looking at women that I see in spaces that I want to emulate, and it's not just women of color, but women across the board that are doing dynamic things, researching how they got there, why they got there. And not like a stalkerish way, but like if you see they're going to be speaking somewhere, clearly you want to go and be in that space just to see what drives them. So for me, another woman that I am just profoundly blown away by is Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett is who I've actually modeled my career by in so many ways. She was a woman of color. She speaks Farsi, which is an Iranian dialect, but she was a senior advisor to President Obama. And so there were opportunities where you could either see the president or you could meet Valerie Jarrett. And of course, for me, I was so excited about the fact that there was a woman in this senior space doing these amazing things that I was able to use my connections to be able to meet her. And she was as dynamic and powerful in person as she was in any other space. And those relationships were able to help me, even in the future, have opportunities that when the president came to Newark, New Jersey, which was a big thing, and he came there talking about criminal justice reform, which is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, that Valerie Jarrett was also part of that process in making sure he was there, making sure we were highlighting a city like Newark. But also I realized the importance of having the ear of your boss. She is so attuned into what President Obama was doing or saying, even while he had a chief of staff, you know who was directing and guiding him? This woman named Valerie Jarrett. So you got Micheline Davis to Google, and you got Valerie Jarrett to Google, right? So these are people that you want to know about. But also it's about being fearless. If you know at the end of the day that you want to get somewhere, there's a person that you know can help change the trajectory of your career, you got to be fearless in this. So the things that you are afraid of, the things that, I have anxiety sometimes about this stuff, but you got to get over it. You have to get over it knowing that you want to see yourself in a certain space at the end of the day. So
not to get too psychological, but let's, again, I want to, this is a really important muscle that we've talked about in the previous classes, and I just want to reaffirm it. Again, you're in a mode, you're maybe 20 years old, you're kind of discovering your passion. It sounds like there are a couple of takeaways that you've already talked about. Find out, or at least target people who could serve as examples or mentors, learn about them, perhaps go to hear them speak, Google them. They match, obviously, the career, the trajectory that you want to go. So, but then there's the other section, which is developing those relationships with those folks. and, you know, being able to go to someone like Micheline for advice or counsel or to get just someone to vent to. What empowered you to, how are you feeling when you want, and again, I keep you using this name because you use it, but just with anyone, I mean, you've met and, you know, you confide in a lot of important people in the state. How, at an early age, when you were first doing it, how did you feel going up to random people, and how did you get around any type of concerns or anxiety you might have? And and I'm leveraging and I'm pushing on this because it's a theme of a lot of our classes, and it's also something, it's a muscle that I think all of us need to really build in order to get and create that luck for ourselves. So walk us through how you deal with some of those.
So I would say this, everybody's gonna have like their inner Beyonce at some time or at some point in life where you're in it right now. I love this Cardi B a little bit. But I feel like everybody has to have almost this alter ego where the things that you would normally be afraid of, you force yourself and push yourself to do. And one of the times when I was reading about Beyonce, you know, she's got this alter ego and Sasha Fierce. And so the things that she's normally timid about, Sasha Fierce takes on this whole different persona. So for me, the persona that I wanted was to be a person that wasn't afraid, right? Because it can be very intimidating being in a room with a lot of elected officials, being one of the youngest people there, but realizing, all right, so I can either stand here in the corner and be like every other intern that's here, or I could have guts, right? Or I could, and it's not a thing that's easy, trust me. It's a nerve-wracking thing, but again, like I said, if I knew there was a person I wanted to meet, I did my research on them already way in advance, knew who they were, knew their interests, knew things about them that I could connect with as well, and had to have this fearlessness in you where you want to go up and say hello. Like Mr. Man who's almost about to fall asleep, he's not going to fall asleep. Who would you be afraid to meet? That's all right, I'm all about calm people out, okay.
It's okay.
But your shoes are cute, so I love them, it's all right.
Okay.
They're cute though, right? They are.
One question. Come on, I'm ready.
You ready for this now? So, has there been anybody in the career that you may want to go in that you've been afraid to meet, or have you always just been ready to go?
Afraid to meet? I mean,
In your work, like in spaces that you wanted to be able to work.
In general, like when I first meet people, like there's always that nervousness. I wouldn't say afraid, nervousness, because you never know what kind of conversation or what kind of, you know, just like any energy, like what to expect. But I wouldn't say I was never really afraid to talk to people. It's like that first conversation, and then after I get through the first conversation, it's like my comfortability. Like once I get comfortable, like I can talk for days.
And so, if you meet a person that you know you may want to go into their industry, would you do follow-up letters, follow-up emails?
Yeah. So with job interviews, like in general, like I always do follow-up calls, like, oh, did you get my resume, or I applied for a position. Just wondering if you know looked through my resume yet. Like I always that's something my father always taught me to do, follow-up calls, or if you could, to drive there and see and like meet them in person.
See, he takes all my stalker techniques. I can find different words, so I can't say stuff like that. But just being really, just being really persistent in these spaces, which I think is really good. Now, Ms. South Jersey.
Yes.
In the spaces that you know you may want to go into or you may want to enter into, the people that you see that you know you want to be able to emulate or highlight, have you been in spaces where you've been afraid to meet them, or and then tell me what space that is too.
Okay, so my goal in life is to be a nurse practitioner.
Yes.
I haven't really met a lot of people yet that I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to be, emulate you. I have professors, of course, but I have professors, and I do have a mentor on campus, Julie. And I emulate them, and I take on a lot of what they have shown me and taught me. Me personally, I'm not very afraid. I had to come out of being, afraid to talk to people.
Good.
When I got the opportunity to join my sorority, I met
sorority?
Sigma Gamma Rho sorority.
Okay.
So I had to meet a lot of people. And at first it's like, oh gosh, how am I going to start this conversation? But you have to learn to get out of that, because it's like,
exactly.
You don't have a choice. These are people who are probably going to be in your life and can help you and influence you in ways that, if you don't speak to them, you're going to miss out on an opportunity.
That's exactly right. I think that's a good point for you guys all to take, and it was so well stated, because you're right, you want to get out of your own way, so the next step is your best step, and that you can go forward. And I think that's something that's so critical and so good in different spaces. So.
But you never know, like, the same person that you're looking at, they may be shy to talk to you in return. So
that's so true, but you know what you realize at the end of the day, and I think this is a good point to pull out, is that everybody's human. Like even down to the president, even down to the biggest CEOs, even down, you saw Mark Zuckerberg have to go before the Senate right now. But no, right? Invasion of privacy much? But you do see that at the end of the day, everybody's human. So even people that I admire in a tremendous kind of way or have nothing but respect for, I realize everything I've gone through, they've probably been through. Every nervous encounter I've had, they've probably had the same encounter as well. But I have a feeling with this group, because you guys make it a point to come to emerging leadership type of spaces, your mindset is different, and what you want to do and how you want to move about this world is different. And I think that's so dynamic that at this age, you're doing that.
So I want to also segue beyond that into the challenges, which you've already been so honest and direct about as it relates to being a woman of color, young and successful. I think all of us at some capacity are going to feel moments professionally of great frustration, of anxiety, of feeling, how can I control or tackle this issue? And, I think all of us, as we deal with this over and over and over again, we start creating systems in our brain and hopefully support systems within our friendships and our families to be able to deal with some of these issues. And I'll be honest, I will never be able to experience or understand some of the challenges that you've had to persevere through. And I think if you could give us a little bit of an insight, or our students an insight into, what's it like to be, not just what's it like to be in that room and be treated in an inappropriate way, but how do you persevere through it? We talked a little bit about persistence. We've talked about persistence in terms of finding jobs in the past. I also think a big part of success from a career-wise isn't just persistence, it's also perseverance. So the question I would have is, how, not necessarily, you don't have to get into some of the challenges, but how have you dealt with some of those challenges?
So I'll give you just a recent experience. I hate talking in public with a passion. And in the new role that I'm in, I feel like, I've got these degrees, Rutgers, NYU, I feel like I've done a really good job in the spaces I've been able to operate in. Going into a space where you're on a team, but still it's a competitive space, competing with other people, you will always have these doubts about things. And so for me, this overwhelming sense of anxiety and questioning everything about leaving municipal to come work at a state level, knowing everything I was giving up and knowing the opportunities I had to gain. There were times, probably my first or second week, where I would cry. I was so mad that I was trying to get acclimated in this new space on a statewide level, really taking on big policy issues that are substantive, that are deep, whether it's about re-entry and how we really impact boys and men of color, whether it's talking about the legalization of marijuana, but also knowing how it's impacted so many Black and brown people of color, and now we're legalizing it. So I'm having all this anxiety going into these spaces because the issues are so big and you can't wrap your mind around them, but also having that feeling of, oh my gosh, can I do this? Am I really good enough? And I think that's something that we've all kind of battled with at some point, and it can either paralyze you or you'll have to move through. And I remember I've only been here now in this position for 4 months, but I remember being so paralyzed in fear about speaking my truth and speaking about the things that were important to me, because I didn't know how was it going to be received, or I didn't know, if it was something that the governor would be in tune with or that my boss would be in tune with, who's the chief policy advisor. And so these are the insecurities that would literally keep me awake at night. And I remember, I pray a lot, I pray and meditate, do all these things, but I remember coming to a point where I had to feel so broken and so contrite in my spirit that I knew that brokenness is what was going to build me back up. So losing a little bit of the ego that I had from previous positions where everybody knew who I was, to being really broken, to understanding it's no longer about the name you built, it's about what you're going to do going forward. And knowing that every day I had to research and read and write all over again as though I was an undergrad or as though I was getting pledged again, but really taking that in because it was a different space. And so I think now it's a more comfortable feeling, but even having to prepare memos in a very different format where this governor, the governor of the state, things very succinct, very direct. I write in very flowery ways, and that's not what they dealt with. So taking in criticism about my writing, which is something I've been very proud of, taking in criticism about some of my views, but being able to articulate why it's important. And I use marijuana and the legalization of marijuana because there's this big dialogue going back and forth about legalization and this big Republican figure, Boehner, just said after years of saying he hated, he would never legalize marijuana, now that he's in the private sector, is now going forward to legalize it and even saying, why are so many people getting arrested for this? It's not that bad. But meanwhile, while he had a position and a place to change it, he didn't do it. And so for me, it's being able to look at this legalization through the lens of social justice and understand if I don't say something, if I don't articulate my points in the right way so that it resonates with a larger audience, me caring about black and brown people going to jail won't matter because I won't get it across. And so the anxiety I felt about not being good enough, not being able to articulate, I had to get over, right? Because what I can't let happen is we go to this space where we're legalizing marijuana and everybody of color that's been penalized before doesn't see any type of opportunity on the back end, whereas now many people will. So,
But you're talking about something important for all of us, which is how do you deal with transition? How do you deal with being challenged?
Yeah.
How do you deal with adapting to a boss? I want to also go, again, a layer deeper, which is,
I'm trying to go deeper. I'm trying to get stuff out that I want to say. But
No. But I want to also make sure that everyone here understands that the challenges that you've faced go beyond those challenges, right? I mean, that you've had to deal with at times discrimination, sexism, inappropriate behavior that I'm sure you've witnessed. Where do you get the strength and the skill set and sort of the strategy to either compartmentalize that or to address it or to move on? I mean, because obviously, you were referencing it at the beginning of your comments, those things are big and they did not hold you back to success.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we live in a society, even now and even 10 years from now, where these challenges are still going to be prevalent.
Yeah.
And I think your insights and experience on how you've addressed it would be, I think having both those things, having a strategy to deal with just a challenge of it being in a new environment is important, but also the more extreme environments that maybe people in this room will have to deal with. I've said this before in my classes, but I've sat in boardrooms where, and at the time I wasn't even cognitive of this, but I've sat in boardrooms where it'd be all white males, and it didn't even dawn on me at the time. It does now, but it didn't even dawn on me at the time. Like, that's really messed up. How do we deal with that when you're in that situation? Maybe you, Ty Cooper, you go into a board meeting and you're the only woman, you're the only African American woman, and that's in itself a challenge. So how do you deal with that?
So when you acknowledge where you are, the spaces and places that you operate in, and you say something to acknowledge it, right? So for me, it's one of those things of going into spaces. One of them, even now, looking at a very big board on the state and having to tell my boss and other white men, hey, so by the way, as we talk about diversity, we cannot have this really powerful board be comprised of all white men. There's no women, there's no people of color on here, and you have to address it. So I think I've gotten comfortable enough being able to address and identify concerns, but also be really proactive in how I lay it out and why it's wrong and what we can do to address it. And I'm always very big on optics, how things look, and I think that's like that 360 perspective that you have to do, because you can't govern like that. One of the things that we're following up right now is diversity, inclusion, and equity on a statewide level, because we can't just talk the talk, we have to walk the walk about it, right? So one of it is being able to call it out, but calling it out in a very professional manner. I know Ty Cooper, I won't say 20 years ago, but a few years ago, would have very different language that I use going into these scenarios. But I think for me now, being able to raise concerns and talk about the importance of inclusion and diversity and why that matters in these spaces because of how our population, our demographics are changing, and by having such a diverse base and basing it off of like a Harvard Review study, why diversity matters in these spaces and having solid facts behind it, it helps my argument.
Yeah.
So it's not just me now emoting or being emotional or calling something out, this is how it looks, but it's having facts to back up why diversity in these spaces really matters. So one thing is being prepared and always having data behind you. I am a data-driven person all day, all night. Like, that's what I do, because data to me, that's facts. It's something that is, I'm old and I'm gonna show up. But Jay-Z has this line, like, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. And it's so true to me. It's one of those things where, like, facts and data, you can't change it. It is finite. And so I think for me, being able to have finite positions and things, and then layering in opinions on why it's happening a certain way allow me to make my conversations stronger. As far as being a woman in these spaces, I'm so blessed and proud to be a woman, because I think that we're at a space right now, whether it's the governor signing on to this equal pay legislation or being in a space where there's more, the percentage of women in schools getting degrees, secondary degrees, is so out the charts right now. And I think that is such a power movement behind what we're doing. And I think the fact that it was a black woman that started a Me Too movement that grew into something so big is powerful. So you're never in these spaces or fights alone. And the fact that it was such a diverse array of women that started the Women's March, I think those are the things that you can look to, right? So one is being prepared, one is realizing that you've got allies in spaces that you can always rely on. And then, you know, the third thing I always just fall back on is just being prepared and being able to speak the truth.
And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to say that I think it's I think it's kind of like sad when we have for the things I think they should give us anyway. Like women are so strong. It's like we always come second in a way.
80 cents to $1. Yeah, but I think the fact that we're addressing it now and that now it's not so silent is a big deal.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my mom did, and that I think that, you know, just put in my head, is I was like crying about going through these spaces where I was really, you know, insecure and nervous about things. She was like, okay, I need you to look back on like what we've overcome as people and really put that before you. So Oprah has this picture of a slave mother and her daughter holding on to her. And my mom was like, you know, we carry these images around because you realize like sometimes you're gonna be the only one, but you have to persist, you have to push through, you have to be the one to say something or else it won't change, period. And so on my phone right now, I have Ruby, who was the first young woman to desegregate schools, but had to have marshals walk her in, right? And I carry these, right?
It wasn't,
But
they was spitting on her and everything as a
but
kid.
could you imagine that? Like even the spaces that we're in right now, that we're able to be in, educated as people of color, is such a triumph in so many ways. So yes, things should be easier. Yes, it should be different. But the fact that we know we can survive it and we know we have to go forward, that's why we're in these spaces, right? Like that's why we're here. And that's why we cannot turn back. And that's why, and I say this not just in places of color, but in every space, that like you have to study more, you have to be harder, you have to be smarter, you have to get there earlier, you have to stay there the latest, because that's what's going to make the difference, period. Period. And even now in the spaces that I'm in, I'm still challenged over credentials, over degrees from people that don't have degrees. They're white men. But every day I will go in there, walk in my truth, and have better information, be better prepared than they could ever be. And I think that's something that as women we take in, but something that we just have to march forward with, period.
So I want to open it up now
Yeah.
for, we've kind of hit some key points of the seminar, and you know, we have probably about 10 or 15 minutes, if not, but we can probably go longer. But yeah, don't feel like you have to talk about what I just talked about, talk about whatever's on your mind.
Okay, I have two questions. One of my questions were, how were you able to, with all, like, I'm sure you have plenty of setbacks, how were you able to keep the same positive mindset and be here today?
So for me, like I said, I'm grounded fully in spirituality. I don't know about religion as much, but I'm grounded in the belief that there's something bigger and better that binds us all together as a whole, but that also grounds me. And I think that's something that, you know, I can't lose and or change, because it's a motivating force. It's a force that helps me to forgive also. So when I was in Orange and that whole situation happened and I was questioned about everything, one of the biggest things I learned how to do, and it was the hardest thing, was how to forgive those same people that talked about me, who wanted me to fail, was to be able to forgive them and move on, because it was bigger than them and bigger than me. So I think being grounded in something, right? Find that thing that grounds you. For me, it's spirituality, and then also being able to let go and forgive. Because if I look at Michelle Obama right now, and the people that called her monkey, ape, talked about her like a dog, but guess what? I'm still first lady, right? And then even after that, like people are still asking her to run for office. But if she had held on to all of that, to how people looked at her, and she was a very black woman, like, listen, no perms, no pieces, like she is who she is, and walked in that truth. But how she was presented, how she was talked about, how she was shamed for having a big butt, all these things they talked about with her, she still held her head so high and knew that I have to do this because the people that come before me or after me have to see that a black woman can survive in this space, not be targeted as an angry black woman, but can show other little girls, this is what you have to do in this life. These are the challenges you will be confronted by, but keep your head up even higher, so.
And you don't have to
Yeah.
be first lady to
No,
have that.
because clearly, I mean, Melania is first lady and she posed naked on everything, but I'm just saying, these are facts, these are facts, it's not you being judgmental, these are facts.
She don't want to be first lady.
Right, but again, so again, it's just, yeah, probably be grounded in something and know it's bigger than you.
And then my second question, being as though you mentioned, how you say it?
Micheline Davis.
Micheline Davis and Valerie Jarrett. How are you able to pick those people? You know, people that they have like they're celebrities that you look up to, like Beyonce or whoever. How are you able to pick those
That's a great
specific
question.
people?
Because for me, it's also about like their moral compass in these spaces, right? So for me, there are a lot of women that are in politics that I think just didn't make the right decisions on how they got to level A, B, C, and D. But to me, it's the moral compass that Micheline specifically operates with in a business, in an industry around healthcare, that her focus is so on these communities of color and making sure that they have access to, healthcare, that they have access to the best treatment, and making sure that, again, I say this is like looking at things through the lens of social justice. She does that, but on such a bigger, grander level.
Right.
And again, like to me, her moral compass is right. Like, she's not a fugazi person. She's not a person that's gonna say one thing and do something different. Her word is who she is. It's how she stands. And I think that we need more women in spaces to have integrity like that, so we can follow them, emulate them. And again, she's open to having a ton of mentees. So.
I have another commitment.
Yes.
It was so nice meeting you.
Well, thank you for coming. I'm glad you
problem.
did.
What do we got? Any other questions for Taya?
So, you spoke on the fact that when you go into certain places, like, you have to say, like, hey, what was the word you used? You said you look at the optics of things, and you have to tell them, like, hey, there's no women on this forefront, or no people of color here. Is that something you find yourself doing often, or do you or is that just maybe?
I find it so much more now than before because it's a bigger stage. But to me, I think that if you don't address it, people will let the norm go on. So prior to us being there, was Governor Christie was very clear he wanted white males in positions of power that controlled funding. And for me, being in a space where I know I work for a good governor who, he supports diversity, has more women in his cabinet than ever before. If you see something but you don't address it, to me that's such a punk sellout move. It's such a move where, like, if you're the only one in this space that has access to these individuals to say something, to create change, and don't do it, then that's on you. Like, that's such a cop-out to me. So even if there are things I'm like, oh, I maybe shouldn't have said that. If I didn't, then who else in this room would have said it? Because none of them look like me.
Can you?
Yes.
Before we move on, break that question down a little bit. That, like, because obviously you're sitting there in Trenton with the governor. You got some big stakes going on here with this. How can you relate that to, like, something that maybe any of us who are around, like, may deal with on a daily basis?
So for you guys that are in schools and are looking at a board of trustees or board of governors or student government that doesn't reflect the population that attends the school, that's when you say something, right? And so the reason that I'm so happy we have groups, all these different groups, from like the Latino organizations to women organizations to Black student unions, is because students before you recognized that there was a lack of and said something. And I think one of the fights they go through, even now at Howard University, historically Black college, is observing that some of the trustees don't reflect the values that they should, so they're saying something to change things. It's not the adults, it's you guys.
That's great.
Yeah.
There's a question back
Yeah,
there.
when you made the transition, you had said you were battling anxiety and fear and maybe even second guessing.
Yeah.
Would you say that it was to the extent, do you ever experience imposter syndrome?
Tell me more.
Okay, so I definitely get imposter syndrome a lot in my other work. It's basically where you're looking around and you have the position and you're almost thinking like, well, why am I here? I can't live up, and
Yeah.
I feel like that's even a level above anxiety sometimes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you weren't familiar with it, it's a very interesting term to look into. But
No, but I think and this is what one of my friends said to me, like, if it doesn't terrify you, shake you to your core, and excite you at the same time, then it's not worth it. And this did all of the above. Like I've never questioned myself more, but realized there was such a profound moment to be here in this space at this time, right? But I feel it, trust me. I feel it. The nerves are there, they are real, and the constant questioning, but that's when it comes again to being so grounded, so rooted firmly in spirituality to me, and knowing that it's bigger than me.
That's a question. So my question was, how were you able to like balance as far as like your beliefs and what you believe in and what you believe is the right thing between the right decision as far as policy making for the community and things like that?
Because I have integrity. I mean, there are certain things I won't compromise on, I won't give in on. And I keep on saying this piece about marijuana because to me it's a complete issue of integrity. Even if I don't smoke, even if, you know, it's not, there's an issue intrinsically in something that is going to make money, billions of dollars for a state, but has been so oppressive to people of color that now instead of decriminalizing marijuana, now we're looking at alternatives just so that we can have it in spaces where people can buy it, mass produce it, regulate it, change and alter it, but not be penalized for it. And so for me, like it's about integrity, point blank. And so if I don't believe in something, then I won't do it. And if I can't, and I wouldn't work in a position or for a governor or for a senator or for a mayor, that if I don't believe in what you're doing, and I think that your policies are going to be detrimental to the greater good of the people that we're supposed to serve, I'll walk away. Like my integrity is worth so much more than I will walk away and skip away actually.
Where did that come from?
Yeah. My mom is a minister.
Do you think marijuana can be legalized in our state?
I think it will.
I think it will.
And I think it's going to be a great money, it's going to be a great revenue generator, but I think to balance it at the same time with giving opportunities to those that have been penalized and victimized by marijuana being criminalized. So that's a little round there, but I think you have to make sure that it's equal on all ends.
Right, and then taking into account the rise of other narcotics to fill the deficit on the street potentially too.
Yeah, and I think you have to be very cognizant of that. Marijuana is not a gateway drug, as so many people would like to say that it's not. I think in some ways by regulating the market and giving opportunities to previously those individuals that have been the best entrepreneurs, it will help to mitigate some of that.
Any other questions, guys? So I'll end on just a couple notes. First of all, I think this is, I'm pretty sure, yeah, this is our last session of the semester. I appreciate the three of you guys coming to it. I think we're going to be doing it again next fall in a more formal capacity, but as I've asked everyone during these seminars, spread the word, let people know what we're trying to do. I think we're lucky enough to have people like Ty and the others who have come before you on this campus, and I think if we really appreciate the three of you guys coming, we appreciate the other two that had to leave early, but help us spread the word a little bit because we do think what we're creating here is of value. Secondly, and most importantly, I just want to thank Ty. Ty is really, truly like the busiest woman in show business. She is always got something going on. Today sounds like a crazy day with this press conference. We're really lucky to have her presence, but we're also very lucky also to have her insights and her direction in terms of building career, creating luck, and I'm just doing it with a sound mind. So obviously we're really lucky to have her, and we thank her for coming. So.
I don't know if I was in school if I would have done it, so I appreciate y'all. And then also I would say this, and I'll send it to your teachers, but if you guys are interested in internships on a state or municipal or federal level, let me know. In nursing, there are a ton of opportunities working with the Department of Health, looking at it through, again, there's policy in health that maybe a different little pivot, but if there are things your students are interested in, then we can get them internships for. I didn't stress it, but that's like one of the easiest ways to get your foot in the door somewhere and realize what you like, what you don't like, and how you can pursue your goals. So, Jits, I'll make sure that
Bring it on.
Matt can get everything.
We'll share it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.
Hi. Sorry.